Welcome to the Health Trip Podcast. My name is Jill Foose. I'm a functional medicine and integrative nutrition health coach. I created this podcast to bring you along as we travel down intriguing, science-packed roads, debunking old medical paradigms and perusing new innovative therapies and modalities with the finest functional medicine doctors, practitioners, and like-minded biohackers while living our best life. Enjoy the show. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode on the Health Trip Podcast. Something we don't talk about enough in menopause is desire. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Health Trip Podcast. Something we don't talk about enough in the menopause conversation is desire. Not just the loss of it, but the possibility of reclaiming it, rebuilding it, and discovering that your second act might actually be where you finally stop apologizing for what turns you on. I talk about health a lot. Obviously, I'm a health coach, but a few years ago, I added sexual health and pleasure as a core pillar alongside sleep, nutrition, exercise, and stress management. And honestly, it may be in the top two after sleep. The evidence is clear. Sexual pleasure alone or partnered improves cardiovascular health, boosts immune function by 30%, supports mental health, relieves pain, improves sleep, and maintains pelvic floor health. I am absolutely making a case for you to prioritize your sexual pleasure this year. But the issue for most women isn't physical. It's permission to want it, to pursue it, to use tools that feel a little unfamiliar, maybe even a little taboo. And one of those tools is erotic content. And I know that word just made some of you really tense up. But here's what I want you to consider. For decades, pornography was made by men for men. It reflected the male gaze and left most women cold at best. The stigma many of us carry makes complete sense. We were never the audience. But that's changed. There's a growing world of erotic content made by women, directed by women, for women, that is aesthetically beautiful, emotionally resonant, and designed to turn you on in a way that feels safe, exciting, and entirely yours. And for midlife women navigating menopause, lower estrogen, lower testosterone, and reduced spontaneous desire, or that Hollywood sex, erotic content can be a powerful tool for re-engaging the brain's role in arousal. Because desire in midlife is often responsive. You need a reason to want it. The right erotic content can be that reason. This episode is about permitting you to explore a side of yourself that's always been there. Part curiosity, part hunger, but never quite feeling safe enough to come forward. My guest today is Holly Randall. She has spent her entire life in this world. Her mother, Susie Randall, was the first female photographer to shoot for Playboy, Hustler, and Penthouse. And Holly grew up in the company of Larry Flynt, Tracy Lords, and Ginger Lynn, if you know any of those names. She went on to build her own empire as a photographer, director, producer, and host of the Holly Randall Unfiltered podcast. And in 2024, she was inducted into AVN Hall of Fame, all while championing erotic content that centers women's pleasure, not men's gratification. And for those of you who are not familiar with what AVN stands for, it's Adult Video News. Think of it as the equivalent of the Oscars or the Grammys for porn. So sit back, open your mind, and let's dive into the world of erotica. Hey, Holly, welcome to the Health Trip Podcast.
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much for having me.
I am really excited for this. You might be one of my favorite guests I've ever had on this podcast. And not because you're an unexpected guest, even though you are, but because the conversation we're about to have is one I think so many women desperately need, and almost nobody is having this out loud, especially in the area of menopause, which is my specialty. And I work with women who have been intimate with their husbands, who have not been intimate with their husbands in like 5, 8, 10, 12 years, like a significant chunk of time. And they're not indifferent about it. They're heartbroken. They love their husbands. And it's this loss that they don't know how to talk about, let alone fix. And so, one of the things I've started talking about with my clients who are all midlife women and beyond is carefully, because there's so much shame wrapped around this, is building a sexual pleasure toolkit and finding all the tools and permission structures that help reawaken desire that has gone quiet in this second act. And one of those tools, the one that stops women dead in their tracks when I bring it up, is erotic content. And that's exactly
Mm,
why you're here today.
yeah, I figured.
Right? Why else? So I want to sort of start off by just getting to know you a little bit more and what it was like actually growing up in a world of porn, because your parents were pornographers. And when did you know that this was going to be your path too?
So yeah, people are often surprised to hear I had a really wonderful, lovely, normal childhood. I my mom's British and my dad's South African, so there was this interesting contradiction of them trying to, make sure that they raised like a proper lady with good British values. So they sent me to like cotillion.
Hmm.
And I rode horses and I went to private school and they were very like strict on grades and that kind of thing. And then also, this obvious other side of them, which was that, they were kind of like had this hippie mentality. They believed the human body was beautiful. So, there was like nudity around the house. Um and I mean, they didn't like hang out nude all the time, but it wasn't like a situation where, they would like if my dad went swimming at home, he'd probably not wear a bathing suit. He didn't like to. And like it's not like they would like if they were getting changed and I like had to come into their room and ask them something as a kid, it's not like they would be like, "Oh my God, get out of here."
Hmm.
So yeah, it was very open and free. And then obviously, they shot porn. So and they never hid it from me. They certainly were, understood it wasn't appropriate to show a child pornography. And, keep in mind, like back then, the internet did not exist. And
Right.
my mom was a predominantly an erotic photographer, and she shot for magazines like Playboy, Hustler, Penthouse, all that kind of thing. So, when I saw porn, mostly as a kid, it was in magazines. And even back then, it was softcore. Like, if there was any like what we call boy girl scenes, a guy and a girl together, there wasn't actually any even penetration or anything at the time because of like distribution issues across different states had different rules and stuff like that. So even like the porn that I was able to like sneak, from the office, which was the back guest house when I was like
Hmm.
a teenager, was pretty tame by today's standards in terms of like what kids are exposed to. Um, but yeah, I mean, I just, I always knew, right? Like they just didn't make a big deal about it. It was like, mom and dad, we make content for grown-ups and it's not appropriate for you. And like when you're older, you can look at it, but like for now, this part of our office, this guest house, this is off limits. This is not for kids. And generally as a kid, you don't care what your parents do, as
Right.
long as they're able to like buy you Barbies and ice cream, like what I care what you do.
Right.
Um, so obviously it wasn't until later that I became more interested when I started going through puberty. And then I always know I wanted to be a photographer from the age of 12 when I started taking classes. I fell in love with it. But I didn't at the time imagine that I would be working in the adult industry. I thought I was going to do fashion or like celebrity photography. And so I went off to school. I went to Santa Barbara. I went to Brooks Institute. And then I really wasn't like feeling like I fit in at that school. I wasn't enjoying it. And my parents had just launched their website, SuzNet. And this is the early days of the internet, right? Like, I think we launched, oh, I can never remember. I should look this up. If it was a month before or a month after Google launched. Like, that's how
Hmm.
old the site is.
Hmm.
So it was doing really well. And, my dad was like, "Hey, do you want to come home and kind of help us out, with some admin stuff in the office? Like I can, pay you pretty well and you can come back down here and go back to school in LA. And so I was like, sure, I kind of felt like my time in Santa Barbara was done. I came back and I started working for my parents and finishing up my degree at UCLA. And then I just kind of like unexpectedly fell in love with the adult industry. And I think it was really a combo of the perfect timing because my parents were doing well financially with the internet. So my mom was now able to shoot whatever she wanted and she had a good budget for it. And my mom's always been known for like high-end glamour content. That's really what set her apart from everybody else. So now, we had the finances to shoot like just really cool stuff, right? Like we would have a meeting and be like, what are we going to shoot next week? Oh, let's do like a 1920s like gangster scene and like rent an awesome car and get some like Tommy gun props and dress a girl like all sexy and like film noir. And we could do that. We could do whatever we
Mhm.
wanted. And so it was really a very creative space. People just ended up, taking their clothes off afterwards.
I love how normalized the whole thing was, right? Because,
Mhm.
I have 5 kids. I'm a grandma now. And my ex-husband and I, we just normalized sex, drugs, and alcohol because the more you just threw it on the table and normalized it, the less it was hidden, right? The
Mhm.
more curiosity people had, or our kids had, and the more questions and the more conversations and how to be healthy about it and responsible about it. And so I just love that your parents were like, this is this is what we do. This is our career. Um,
Mhm.
we still show up at school when we have to for, you know, PTO meetings or whatever it is,
Yeah.
conferences, but this is what we do and this is how we support our family. And so I think that's a really healthy approach being a mom, just coming from my perspective, because sex has been this really taboo thing in a lot of people's lives. And it just doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah. I think it can be, the obviously like early inappropriate exposure to sex is obviously like is not a good thing. But also like lack of education and communication around sex is also damaging as well,
Yep.
because you just when you don't teach people, especially now, when you don't teach your kids about sex and give them an understanding and a lack of fear to ask about it, they're going to learn it from Pornhub, which is
Yep.
not what you want because that is not an educational device.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. So you have all this photography experience and you have a passion for photography. But how did your formal photography training shape the way you approach erotic content once you got into it?
Not at all,
Mm,
really. I mean, I look, I mean, back then we shot on film. And so I learned a lot about like processing film and printing and stuff like that. But, Brooks Institute it wasn't a particularly creative school. It focused a lot on like tech. It put out a lot of wedding and like product photographers, which was not what I was after.
hmm.
Um, and it was also very sexually stifled. In fact, one of the main reasons I decided to leave was I remember I had a friend who was graduating, and what when you graduate, you do something what's called a grad show, and the school you select 7 of your best pieces or whatnot, and your school puts it up in the hallways, and your parents come to your graduation and everybody walks around and sees your artwork and marvels at the content that you've produced over the years. And one of my friends did beautiful artistic nudes, and like not even full nudes, like some topless stuff, and but it was very like subtle. And Mr. Brooks had gone around and taken white pieces of tape and stuck it over the nipples of all of the pictures, which like and he didn't even know. And he was devastated, obviously, and it ruined his. And I was just like,
Yeah.
this is not the place for me.
Yeah.
So really what I learned, and I actually say this to a lot of people because you can spend a ton of money going to film school, which is fine if you have it, but you can also just go into the field and learn almost everything
Hmm.
that you need to know in the field. You can start working. And that's where I really learned was working for my mom, was working with the incredibly talented people that she employed. That's where I learned photography, not really at Brooks.
What did you learn from your mom in the early years that surprised you?
Um, I mean, let's see. So I wouldn't say that this was like surprising, but I definitely learned from her like how to treat the models. That was really important that the girls felt like safe and sexy and that they felt like they had a voice and they just felt like they were in a place where really wanted people to have like a good time, right? She would always say your model's only as good as she feels, which I think
Mm,
is really true. And that came from her experience as a model back in the day when she would work with all these like, stuffy male fashion photographers who just like treated you like an object. I
hmm.
wanted to be a model when I was younger, and she dissuaded me from it. She was like, "You have no power and you're treated terribly." She's like, "Try the other side of the camera." Um, so that was really important to her. But one thing that I really learned from her that I think is kind of is one of my best traits, but also sort of a lost art, especially these days where video is so, predominant in our industry, is posing the
Mm,
models and understanding like shapes and lines and like pointed toes and cropping and all angles and all this stuff that like a lot of like photographers these days, quote unquote, like do not understand at all, because a lot of times now pictures are just like what we call pretty girls, which is just like promo photos to use maybe for
hmm.
the box cover or whatever. Not that people buy DVDs anymore.
Right.
Um, Before the video starts.
Hmm.
So like I was lucky that I got to learn in a world where we were just doing photography, and so we could spend all day shooting one or two sets and really focus on getting everything right.
Yeah. Your podcast, Holly Randall Unfiltered, is great, by the way, but
Thank
it's also
you.
known for humanizing the people inside the erotic industry. And I wanted to know when you started, what did the conversation around women in this industry look like, and how has that shifted over your career?
I mean, the reason I started the podcast was because I kept coming up against this idea that all women specifically, but look, like men and women in the adult industry were stupid, had a drug problem, had no other alternatives, were just basically broken people. And I just always felt like if you could just, because one of my favorite things, if not my favorite thing about the industry and what keeps me in it is the people. I love
Mm,
porn stars. They're the fucking best. When I shot for Playboy, I would shoot porn stars and I would shoot sometimes like fashion models who just wanted to shoot for Playboy. And the difference between like the two, and how they carried themselves and how like they saw the world and just what they were like to work with was like so drastically different. And I even worked with a couple of celebrities, and I just like was like, I don't ever want to work with anyone but porn stars. Everyone else is a pain in the ass, you know?
what made them
Um,
so special to work with?
they're just so they're so like free and authentic and comfortable in who they are. And I
Mm,
think that there is something to be said for somebody who sheds their clothes for a living. I mean, there goes my clothes, there goes my inhibition. Here's my, vagina for the world to see. Like somebody who's willing to do that has kind of dropped, I think, a lot of the pretense that other people in the entertainment world walk around with. And they're also
hmm.
like less self-conscious, and less like concerned about appearance, uh, I mean, like, I always, for some reason, this line always comes back into my mind. Anna Fox, who is like one of my favorite people to work with. And if I'll ask her a question like, is this okay? Or is that okay? Or how do you feel about this? She'll just say, Holly, my butthole's on the internet. I don't care. And
There
I'm
you
just like,
go.
okay, fair. But yeah, so, and I think, a lot of them had this kind of rebellious counterculture vibe. Also, the adult industry has always embraced like diversity in a way that I think the mainstream industry was pretty
Mm-hmm.
slow to catch up on.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and also I think because the people in it are so stigmatized and there's sort of like a us against them mentality, there's a lot more compassion in
Mm-hmm.
people who work in the industry because they understand what it's like to be looked down upon.
Yeah.
So,
You said a few things that really made me think about the menopause transition, right? Women are feeling a little bit disconnected from their body because a lot of women during this their second act, they can gain weight, their body fat can shift in different parts, mostly around their midsection. Their jeans aren't fitting them the same way they used to. They're not feeling the same in their skin anymore. And they're really struggling with their libido for hormonal reasons. There's a whole slew of reasons why women just don't feel their best right now. And you mentioned that the porn stars that you work with come to their job. It's a job, it's a career, and they can walk around in their skin and feel comfortable with who they are. And they're all different shapes and sizes, and their skin colors are all different. Like they're all as unique as everybody. But they come there and they drop their clothing and they show up for themselves, they show up for their job, and they truly enjoy it. And I think there's a lot of midlife women and beyond who would really love to have that feeling back. Maybe she once felt that way in her 20s. Maybe she's never felt that way ever and is curious about feeling that way. So I think there's some connection here from what you're describing as them showing up and working with them and their confidence level and also being vulnerable and their vaginas and their buttholes are showing. And I think that speaks a lot to women who are really struggling right now.
mhm. I mean, I don't want to mislead people and think that, like, I mean, because of the kinds of brands that I shop for, they generally would go for like a more fit, I guess, quote unquote, aesthetic. But there's so many people in the adult industry, especially now with the like advent of the personal content platforms, like obviously
Hmm.
OnlyFans, camming platforms where there is a like no matter what you look like there's someone who's into
Hmm.
you, you know?
Totally.
I think you see that honestly the most clearly on like a camming platform, right? Where there is no like in between a person in a corporate office deciding whether or not they want to book you for this shoot, which was the world that, that I worked in because I shot for mainstream was what we call mainstream studios, and just means like the big
Hmm.
studios in adult, like Brazzers, Twisties, Playboy, etc.
Yeah.
But I think if you go to like a cam site, I'll plug them shamelessly simply because they're my sponsor, but like Strip Chat,
Hmm.
you'll see every kind of body and person on camera, and they all have like a big audience that's there
Hmm.
watching them that is really into them. And I actually so they there's a camming coach called Nikki Knight who works for Strip Chat, and she does a lot of coaching with girls who are doing camming. And she, talked about the first time she went on, how she was trying to sit a certain way and like make sure that like her rolls didn't show and all that kind of stuff. But when you're doing camming, and a lot of these girls do it for like a few hours at a time, like you can't possibly sit like this the
Yeah.
whole time. You know what I mean? You have to move around and you have to show your body how it is. And these girls have become very comfortable with that. And even because look, like I am not somebody who's completely immune to like body issues. You know what I mean? Like I also would like my roles not to show. I am not perfect by any means. So I watch these girls and I'm just like, the freedom with which they move around and the comfort that they have in their body is really admirable.
Hmm.
Another performer that I would suggest girls look at if they're, somebody if they're a little bit heavier, if they're uncomfortable with their body is Carla Lane.
Hmm.
She's a what we call a BBW performer who's just like just loves herself the way she is. If they can watch my podcast interview with her.
What
And I
does a
was so,
BDW performer mean?
I mean, it's big, beautiful woman.
Ah, okay. Love it.
And you can actually watch my podcast with her, and like the way that she just loves herself, and she's so comfortable with how she looks, and she just carries herself with this in the world with this like light and positivity and energy. She also has three male partners as well. She's married and she has two boyfriends.
Hmm.
Um, and she just like I often think about that, and I was like, to have the freedom and the self-confidence to move through the world like Carla Lane, like what a gift,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You've been really candid about the fact that most of your work was made for a male audience, and
Mhm.
I totally respect that, and I get exactly where you're coming from. But what does content made for the male gaze actually look like, and why does it leave so many women cold when it comes to pornography?
I mean, I think it's, men are visual creatures. So I think it focuses heavily on women's like body parts. So many Gonzo films start with the camera really low and the girl walking and you're right under her butt. Close-up shots of her like playing with her boobs. It's usually overlit, in like a white room with a white couch and like lots of makeup and, you know, um, some kind of really uh complicated outfit on. It takes forever to figure out how to get on, like where does everything tie.
Hmm.
And it generally gets to the sex pretty fast. And the girl is turned on just being in the presence of the viewer, the guy. And
Hmm.
most women don't work like that. Like
Nope.
we take a while to get there.
Hmm.
We take a while to warm up. And I think the problem is because there's not as much female centric porn. And if there is, women don't know how to look for it. So generally they'll go to the website they've heard of the most, which is like Pornhub.
Hmm.
And, they'll go on the front page and there's a bunch of content that just isn't for them.
Right.
My stepbrothers and stepsister stuck in the washing machine and all this like ridiculous stuff. And they don't see anything that appeals to them, and they also see this content where it's like the woman is just like turned on and ready to go like right away, right? And I think it makes people feel like, oh, that's how I'm supposed to be, like I should be ready to go right away. And I think also guys learn from that too, right? And they think, oh, the girl should be ready to go right away, not realizing that like women need foreplay most of
Yeah.
the time, and it doesn't necessarily have to start like in the bedroom. It can start
Mhm.
throughout the day. It can be text messages sent to you, like, can't wait to see you tonight. You look so great in this. Just like it can be like a constant buildup of making someone feel desired and feel sexy. It doesn't only have to happen in this one, time, in this one moment. You know,
Yeah.
if you see like, I don't know. Did you see that movie Baby Girl with Nicole Kidman?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, even that whole thing, like that foreplay started like in the office.
Right.
Like that took days, weeks, whatever to build, right?
Yeah.
So, I think that men have to understand that women take a while to warm up, and women have to also like not feel guilty about that.
100%. We always talk about responsive versus spontaneous desire. So spontaneous is obviously like that Hollywood sex, right? You see your partner and you are both naked in 2 seconds, and the next thing you know, you're like done,
Hmm.
and both satisfied. And that's just not the way it is in real life. And where responsive desire is what you're talking about, the build up, the texting, the looks, the conversation, whatever it is that you and your partner do, long before the act of sex even starts. And this is where I like to talk to my clients about, because responsive desire is something that a lot of women have to learn. We may have just gotten done raising all of our kids. Um, and we're, left in an empty nest. We're now an empty nester in the home with our husband, and it's sort of like, oh, hey, you're still here. Okay, so how do we do this again? And the reconnection, and at the same time, our hormones are changing, our bodies are changing, our brain fog is out there in front. We have 17 different things on our brain to do. It's really hard. We are suffering with low libido. And so I love the idea of visual. I love the idea of erotica for women, whether it's audio or visual, but I really want to help bring down the barrier to entry for women when it comes to porn that is resonating with them, whatever their style is. And this is why I also love the Kinsey Institute, which of course you're familiar with down at Indiana University. So the Kinsey Institute, they do all kinds of studies, and they've done studies on fantasies. And we know that people who talk about their fantasies, not, you don't have to act on your fantasy, but if you have a fantasy and you share it, that's the person who's going to be more curious and more sexually engaging with their partner and have more fun because they are willing to share their fantasy. And a lot of us are having fantasies and just holding it in. And so I see visual erotica as sort of, oh, wait, I just had a fantasy about this scene and here it is in front of me. And how like
Mm.
cool is that? And that might turn me on even more.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this comes down to communication, right? And the
Hmm.
stigma around sex and the fear of and discussing sex and the fear of your partner being shocked or dismayed at what sexual fantasies you might have. And you may encounter that, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I think that comes down to a lack of understanding and exposure to different people's sexual preferences. I know that I certainly, I mean, look, like I obviously consider myself to be a pretty sexually open person, but there were things that I, had prejudices against before I started my podcast and started hearing other people's stories and, what they liked. And like, especially from men, like one example I can think of is like Michael Vegas, who is somebody who, has a female partner. They're open, but, works with women, but he really likes, anal stimulation. And he likes very large anal stimulation. Um, but he doesn't, and always would think like, oh, well, someone like that definitely must be gay. They definitely must enjoy being dominated because they're a man being penetrated, and it's not true.
Right.
Um, and he really helped me see that in a different light. And I think, if like my partner came to me and wanted to, I don't think he ever would. But if he wanted to try to engage in some of that, like a lot of men have pleasure from anal play, like their prostate being stimulated is
Hmm.
something that can be really enjoyable for them, but they're probably not going to tell you that,
Hmm.
for fear of
Being judged
being being judged, being
or left.
emasculated. Yes, exactly. So
Right.
there's a barrier, like I think
Yeah.
for men especially too,
Hmm.
and the idea that like their partner would not be open to certain things. There was an interesting, I wish I could remember the name of it, and I don't know if the app actually went anywhere, but there was an interesting app that literally was specifically for this, for couples who, might have fantasies that they were afraid to tell each other, and each couple would take the questionnaire and it would only reveal the answers to fantasies that matched. And so,
I know of this
do
app
you
and
know what
I
I'm
can't.
talking about?
Yes, I do. I do. I had a sex therapist on the podcast once, Dr. Lori Mintz, and she mentioned this too. So I can find
Yeah,
out what that was. Yeah.
yeah. And it was like, so, if the woman is into the idea of a threesome and also
Hmm.
bondage, and I'm just giving two examples, obviously, and the man is into the idea of bondage and I don't know, role play, the only thing that would come up would be bondage because they both chose it. So all of your
Hmm.
like secret um fantasies that your significant other may not approve of would never even be revealed. And that feels like a
Hmm.
much safer way to kind of explore potential
Hmm.
fantasies together because I can guarantee you that's a big block is that
Yeah.
just that fear of being open and talking about what you're into because sexual fantasies can be out there.
Oh, yeah, totally. And the Kinsey Institute did a study on fantasy, and the number one fantasy was for both men and women was a threesome. And it's something that, most people are not going to act on, especially if they're in a marriage, because most people don't live in an open marriage. Um, so that leads me to you in what you're shooting, which is a lot of solo girl or girl on girl content, because a lot of the threesomes that the Kinsey Institute talked about were mostly two women, two women and one guy, or three women together,
Mm,
which was
mm,
really interesting. And I know you shoot a lot of girl on girl. So by definition,
hmm.
that puts female pleasure front and center, even if the intended audience for you might be male. So can you talk
Hmm.
about the dynamic and what it means for a woman who might actually find that content more resonant and it might turn her on more than traditional straight porn?
I mean, I think like it can feel a little less aggressive, right?
Mhm. Yep.
In fact, sometimes shooting girl on girl porn because specifically I was shooting it like when I was shooting it for Twisties, that was really predominantly for the male gaze because there isn't the act of penetration and the bodies moving together in this way, they would actually insist that I shot scissoring for every scene. And for anyone who doesn't know what scissoring is, it's when you basically wrap your legs around each other and like rub your vaginas together. And
Hmm.
that creates a movement that's sort of similar to
Yeah.
penetration because otherwise, especially because they're doing these little speeded up gifs that they're trying to pull traffic in, the movements were just like too like slow and sensual and like intimate, right? And it wasn't
Hmm.
working for ad conversions, I guess. Um, but for women who might be interested in something like that, that could be really appealing, the
Yeah.
being worshipped, having your body worshipped and exchanging mutual pleasure. There's not always an apparent exchange of mutual pleasure in a guy on girl scene. Sometimes the guy, especially if it's like depending on the brand and if it's meant for the male gaze, the guy goes in
Right.
there to get off and the cum shot's the end of it, right? Once the guy comes, the
Right.
film is over. Everybody's done. We all go home.
Yeah.
And with a female centric scene like girl on girl, both girls have to reach orgasm. And so there's this
Right.
more of an idea, I think, of this exchange of pleasure.
Yeah. So for the woman listening who might have never seen porn before, but she's curious. She's like, you know what? I am curious. I want to see if I get turned on. Maybe this is something I can do alone. Maybe this is something I can do with my partner. Where do you think is the best place for her to start? Is there
I
a
wish there
beginner
was,
route?
I know, and this I think is kind of like the problem, right? Because again, you can go to a tube site that has a lot of, porn that's made for the male gaze. Because let's just be honest, like that's the major
Yep.
demographic, right? So
Yeah.
as a business model, that's usually what you're going to cater to, unless you're doing a very specific niche. I mean, Erica Lust is probably one of the most well-known
Hmm.
feminist pornographers. She's got really beautiful work and it's all over the place. You can see so many different kinds of scenes. Um, Inca Winter Foreplay Films is also somebody who really focuses on like female pleasure first. Balesa Films
Hmm.
is another place that, you can get that same kind of content. So I would recommend that you go to one of those websites and see if you can find, you know, the kind of content that resonates with you. I don't know I wish I could direct you to more of like a, not that everyone should only watch free porn because then no one gets paid, but for somebody who may not be comfortable putting in their credit card right
Right.
away, they want
Right.
to just kind of see what's out there.
Yeah.
I wish there was a more, because I don't think that Erica Lust had, because a lot of these channels now, like Pornhub, for example, they got rid of all the unverified users, so you can only post content if you're a creator. You have to submit your ID and do paperwork and all this stuff to prove that you're you. So you're not uploading content of other people that's not, you don't have permission for,
Hmm.
or you have to be
Hmm.
like a studio. Um, and I don't think that she has an account on any of those sites because I think that she's against it, like on principle.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I'm familiar with her work as well, and I think it's very beautiful work, and I think that's a really good beginner place to start too. It's a little easier
mhm,
to soak in. And like you said, most men are visual, but there are a lot of women who are, I'm a visual learner. So I don't like listening to erotica. So for me, finding more women-centric type of pornography is what I would seek out and have sought out and do enjoy with my partner because I do have to practice responsive desire. I have to
mhm.
have a toolkit, and in that toolkit is erotic pornography for me. I also have a vibrator. I have a lube. If I needed a sex therapist, I would know exactly who to go to. Like I have testosterone. Like I use all the tools because sexual pleasure is a pillar of our health. It helps a lot of things for us. And, I hear women get to a certain point in their life and they're like, I don't care if I ever have sex again. It's like, well, if you were feeling better about yourself in terms of getting the right sleep, eating a healthy diet, exercising, moving more, feeling more energetic, more vibrant, would you change your mind? And maybe for some people, they don't really care. But I think most people, especially in my field and talking to women who are navigating menopause, they want to have sex. They want to have sex with their partners. They want to feel turned on. So um, it's about building this toolkit.
Yeah, and I think it's also about just like connecting with your partner. I
Right.
mean, I'm married and we have a 5-year old, and my husband and I have to really set aside
Right.
time to connect. It's not a spontaneous thing anymore. Like it's just we don't
Right.
have the time. It's not possible.
Right.
So we really have to work on that. One thing that that we've done that I also might recommend if this makes sense for some couples is get some sexy lingerie and have your partner take pictures of you
Mm,
in sexy lingerie. My husband does that with me, and that works for us.
that is such
Um,
a great idea. I love that.
yeah. So, or you could, there's lots of boudoir photographers if you want to, get some pictures done for your husband or
Hmm.
something like that, maybe as a surprise, kind of like explore your own sexuality, find that you can find yourself sexy, that you can, and also like remember too that a lot of this is smoke and mirrors. These girls don't show up generally looking like what you see, right? And there's people like me who are shooting them their best angles to make sure they look a certain way. So, you know, just having like that realistic understanding of, you know, creating entertainment and having people look a certain way to enact a fantasy.
Yeah, I want to circle back to the female performers. We talked a little bit about the men and a little bit about women, but I really want to come back and I really want to help women understand that the women showing up for this job are not just in it for the money, but they've chosen. And I'm not talking about the black market porn. Like that's a whole nother ball game of people who might be forced into doing something that they're not choosing to do. But I'm talking about what you're doing, ethical porn. Um, can you just speak to the safety, the consent, and the agency that people, the women specifically, have when they show up to work?
Yeah. I mean, especially now with content platforms being a lot more careful about what goes up due to like, legislation, and then also again, like these personal content platforms where girls can now create their own content on their own terms and be completely financially independent, and they don't have to depend on studios. They don't need a director telling them what to do. I mean, you'd have, the black market porn that you talk about, you'd have to really look for that stuff. Like you'd have to really like go on the dark web and try to find that. Like you're not going to find that on most again, like what we call like mainstream sites.
Hmm.
But the women, I mean, look, everybody, there's always going to be people who get into the industry for the wrong reasons, and people who are just think it's an easy way to make money. But there's also a lot of women, and these are the kinds of women that rise to the top, and these are the ones that, you may know by name, or, are the most popular performers, are people who truly love their job. They come to the job with like a real sense of building a career, and a real head for marketing, but also like a love for what they do. Because if you don't love what you do, like I feel like first of all, it shows, the fans can kind of tell. And secondly, like it'll never be worth the money. It'll never be how much you make. But ever since COVID, the industry has really kind of buckled down and made sure that consent is a huge part of the conversation. We have what's called boundary checklists now, which we didn't have before. And they're pretty extensive. They can be like 4 or 5 pages long of what you're okay with doing and what you're not okay with doing. And there'll be stuff on there that like you maybe never even thought of, right? Like I didn't even know this was a thing, but you now have this option to say like, yes, I like this. No, I don't like that. I'd be willing to try this, but can we take it slow? And both performers fill it out, and then we go over it. We film it too, just for internal purposes, with the director and the performers, and we talk about what we're okay with and what we don't want, and we can kind of like elaborate on certain things if anything needs to be discussed further. And the model is made to understand that she can call cut at any time for any reason whatsoever. She can change her mind in the middle of the scene if she decides that she doesn't want to do the thing that she said that she was willing to do. She won't be penalized for it. And, I think that that has really made the industry such a safer, more pleasant place to
Mm.
work because, I've been in this for 27 years, and I was shooting a ton before Boundary Checklist came along. And I always thought, like, well, I can tell if a woman's uncomfortable, right? Like, and I would always ask people before we started, like, what are you, just naturally, right? But I realized after doing these that like I don't really know what people are thinking. And especially if you come into the industry young, it's hard to set boundaries. And sometimes it's hard when you're nervous and you're with a bunch of new people and you really need this check to pay your rent, to say something that you might be afraid will prevent you from getting booked again or will get you sent home or something like that. So the culture has also just changed a lot because again, a lot of people are making money on their own with OnlyFans and stuff like that. So they don't need the studios in the way that they did before. And so the studios and brands have been very different in the way that they approach performers and the way they treat performers, right? With a lot
Yeah.
more respect. They understand now that they need the performers, not the other way around.
Yeah.
And so that is just, really shifted the culture. And companies like Alu, which is the brand that owns Browsers and Twisties and Pornhub and all of that, they have a girl who's an ex-model who her job is specifically is to follow up with talent, especially new talent, after the scene, call them on the phone and be like, how was it? Like, now that the scene is over, now that a few days have passed, like, how do you feel about everything? Like, is there anything that could have been done differently? So there's a ton of feedback
Mm.
coming in now, and they're
Yeah.
very careful about the directors that they hire. And, also the power of social media, right? Like, if you're an abusive director or performer, like, you will get called out on Twitter, and every girl will come in. I mean, we had like a second Me Too wave after the big one that, everybody remembers where, a lot of girls finally felt the power because they're financially empowered by their own personal content platforms to come out and say, this person treated me really poorly and I think they're dangerous and I don't think that they should work in the industry. And other people came out
Hmm.
and said, me too. So yeah, the culture is just so different now. And I think that people who are, interested in watching porn now, I really do feel that you can feel assured that the people that you're watching doing the scenes want to be there, enjoy being there, have so much agency. Um, a lot of these girls are producing their own scenes, they're directing stuff. Some of these girls are writing the scripts, and it's really a collaborative effort. And people are not being taken advantage of in the way that the mainstream media paints it.
Hmm. I love hearing all that because I'm really hopeful that hearing the inside scoop of what's really going on behind the scenes. I mean, I am imagining these women showing up to work and they're just wearing sweatpants and a sweatshirt, like their hair's down, they don't have their makeup on yet. They're just showing up for a shoot, just like any other movie star would probably show up, right? It's just they're taking their clothes off and they're having sex. Um, but I'm really hoping that this part of the conversation opens up curiosity with women to stop feeling like these women are being taken advantage of, they're being abused, they're being used by men, and it's not what they're choosing to do. It's just where they landed in their life. And that's not at all what's going on here.
Yeah, I mean, and also too, like keep in mind the adult industry is really small and it's a lot of the same teams working together. And it's often actually the same guys because it's a very difficult job for men. So, this idea that like women are sleeping with like hundreds of men, like they're sleeping with the same like 10 to 15 guys over and
Mm-hmm.
over again, right? And they're also shooting with a lot of the same crews. So, people really get to know each other. So,
Yeah.
you'll know as a performer, you'll know the director, you'll also know the PA, you'll know the makeup, like everybody knows each other. So
Mm-hmm.
when you come on set, it really is like a family,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's also what I love about the industry. Like we're a small, like tight-knit family.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just yeah, I just think it's so different than what people think it is. And also
Mm-hmm.
like, we do a lot of like movie magic to maybe make like a scene look more hardcore than it is. If like you see a really hardcore scene and you're like, oh, that poor girl. It's generally not as intense as it may seem. And like, I mean, here's like a perfect example, right? So I've only shot 3 gangbangs in my life. All of them were orchestrated, put together, and paid for by the girl in it. It's Joanna
Mm-hmm.
Angel, Riley Reid, and Lisa Ann. And I was shooting the Lisa Ann gangbang, and while I'm filming, it's intense, right? And the guys are like, "Yeah," like that. They're like, jumping around and like, it feels very intense and a lot. And then we call cut for whatever reason, and like it completely shifts. And the guys are like checking on the girl. Hey, are you okay? Do you need some water? And then they're like joking with each other, like, did you see the game last night? And like it's just like it just breaks. And
Mm-hmm.
and then if you pull back and you see that, it's just it's like just a bunch of friends. And then
Mm-hmm.
and then you call action again, and then it's back into that like an intense scene. But yeah, it's just it's a lot different than how people think.
I think that's just really important to know because I do think this would be such a great tool for so many women, like I said. And I think there are probably even women out there who fantasize about being in a scene and being videotaped. I've talked to many women who have their husbands videotape them, and which is amazing, right? Anything that's going to help you get turned on and bring in the spiciness that you are thinking about or fantasizing about that you want to act on, to me, it's all amazing, right? Whatever tools you need to have, bring them in as soon as you can because life is short and it's really going to help elevate you in a lot of other areas of your life if you are experiencing sexual pleasure.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. So, what is next for you? What are you working on? And have you ever thought about, now that we're having this conversation about women who are in midlife and beyond, have you ever thought about shooting older women um, in scenes of that nature?
So actually, I did a whole show. I hosted a show for Playboy TV called Adult Film School, and it was specifically shooting amateur couples who'd always wanted to make a sex tape,
Oh,
and producing and shooting a professional sex tape for them. That was the whole show. And the rule was that you could never have, you know, shot a sex tape before you. Like you couldn't be like a professional porn star. These were not
mhm,
actors.
mhm.
These were real people that wanted, you know, to shoot like and so we'd have them come in and we'd interview them and then they tell us their fantasy and then we'd build this whole set for that and we'd do styling and wardrobe and makeup and we'd film the whole process and everything like that. So I actually did do a whole show like that.
That's so
Um
cool. I love that.
yeah, yeah, and it was really
Hmm.
fun.
Hmm.
Uh, I honestly I stopped directing like a few years ago, so I'm not really doing that so much anymore. I'm actually focusing more like on my podcast,
Hmm.
and I started a marketing agency, and I also started a magazine specifically geared towards creators in the industry called Wet Ink. And so those are the things that I'm really focused on right now. And then obviously like, my family.
Hmm.
Um, I've kind of taken a step back from working as much as I used to, just so that I have more time to spend with my family. Because I think I put a lot of long days in for
I
many
bet.
years. So
Do you see in the future of pornography more women coming to different platforms to enjoy it, um, and more uh, producers and directors continuing to create for women in mind?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think so. Pornhub actually does a really interesting survey every year because obviously they're a massive data aggregator, just based on the amount of visits that they get. And they showed a significant increase in women watching porn last
Mm,
year. And that's, just one site where,
right.
like I said, may not be the right place for a lot of women to find the kind of content that they're interested in. But there's definitely been a big growth. I wrote an article on it for Wet Ink. It would have this specific statistic in there. I can't remember exactly what it is. But yeah, so we've already seen like a rise in women watching adult films. So I think that that will probably continue to grow,
Hmm.
especially if people are having conversations like this one.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting and something that I'm definitely going to say akin to for sure. So, Holly, thank you so much for joining me today. And I know that this is going to be a conversation that a lot of women leave with some golden nuggets, hopefully some curiosity, and maybe even some exploration on their own. And where can we find you and your podcast, social media, all the things?
Course. I'm on Instagram at Holly Randall. My YouTube channel is Holly Randall Unfiltered. That's my podcast. My new online magazine is wetinkmag.com. You can also just go to hollylinks.com and there's links to all my things over there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And everyone, thank you for tuning in. And until next time, we'll see you then.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Lifestyle changes can be hard and overwhelming to make. By building your support team of functional medicine doctors, therapists, and health coaches, you can reach your optimal health goals. Be sure to check out my other podcasts. Until we meet again, stay healthy.